Okay, class. So today we're going to be going over subtracting with decimals. And so we have 4 different problems that we're going to be looking at. They all have different examples of places where we might have to even out our numbers by putting our placeholder zeros. There's also examples in here of regrouping, which is when we're going to have to borrow from one of the other digits to go ahead and make sure that we have enough to be able to subtract. So please just make sure that you follow along. I would suggest that you all follow along with me by writing it down and solving them in your math notebook along with me. That will better help you understand what it is that we're doing, and you can pause it along the way. You can even pause and try to solve on your own, see if you're able to, and see if your steps match mine. So let's go ahead and start with number 1. So for number 1, we have 9 and 75 hundredths minus 3 and 62 hundredths. So if you remember when we've gone over our steps and the strategy that we use, is the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and set up my problem. And so the first thing I have to do is put my decimals down to make sure that I line them up. So I'm going to go ahead and put my first decimal. I'm going to put my second decimal because I know that I have 2 numbers, right, where I'm subtracting. I'm going to put my my symbol for subtraction, and then I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I have my decimal down at the bottom for my response, my answer, which is going to be the difference. So in the first one, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I take this first number that I have here and I place it in. So I have 9 and 75 hundredths minus 3 and 62 hundredths. Okay, now that I've set it up and I make sure my decimals are lined up, right, I can go ahead and start with my subtraction. So I'll start with 5 minus 2, and that would give me 3. I would then go with 7 minus 6, which would give me 1. Then I would go ahead and do 9 minus 3, which gives me 6. Okay, and if you noticed, I always make sure when I am adding or subtracting, I always start from the right and then I move to the left. Okay, so now let's go ahead and work out our second problem. So our second problem tells me that I have 12 and 3/10 minus 8 and 9/10. So the first thing I'm going to do is I see that both of my numbers have decimals. So I'm going to go ahead and put my decimals, my subtraction symbol, and then I'm going to go ahead and put my decimal down at the bottom for my difference, in this case my answer, right, my response. So I'll go ahead and start by filling it out. So I see that I have in this first number here, I have 2 digits to the left of the decimal, so I'm going to go ahead and put 12 on this side, and I have 1 to the right, which is 3/10. And my second one, I have 8 and 9/10, so I have 1 digit to the left of the decimal, and then I have 9/10, okay? And so this is that spot where we're talking about when we need to go ahead and include that placeholder 0. And if you saw, I just removed my subtraction symbol so I could scoot it over a little bit, because if you can see right here is where we're going to have to put our placeholder 0 to make sure that I even out my problem. Okay, so now it is even. I have the same number of digits on top that I do on the bottom in both my minuend and my subtrahend. So let me go ahead and subtract now. So the first one I have is 3 minus 9. Well, I know if I have 1, 2, 3/10, can I take 9 from that? I can't, because I do not have enough. So this is where I'm going to have to regroup. So I'm going to have to go to my whole. And in this case, I have 2, right? 2 is my first whole number. So I'm going to go ahead and take one of those wholes, break it apart, right? And I know that one whole is made up of 10/10, right? So I would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this would be my whole, and what I'm doing is when I take one from here, I'm taking a whole and I am breaking it apart, and I am putting these 10/10 which make one whole, I'm now moving them over to the decimal side. So I have 3/10, and I'm going to go ahead and put my 10/10, which gives me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? So now I have 10/10 plus the 3/10 that I have up top is going to give me 13/10. So that is how I change my 3, right, into a 13. Now I have enough to take away the 9. So now I'll go ahead and I'll do that. And so I'll start by taking away the 9. So I'm going to go ahead and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And how many do I have left? I have 1, 2, 3, 4/10. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and move to my whole number side. So here I have one whole, right? Because before I had 2. So I had my 2 wholes, except I broke one apart and I moved it over here to my 10th side to the decimals. So I no longer have this one here, right? I only have my one whole, which is right over here. So I need to take 8 wholes from 1. Can I do that? I definitely cannot. So I'm going to go ahead now and regroup again, and I'm going to take from my tens place. So if I have a 10, right, 110, that means that I have a total of 10 tens. That's what I would have. So I would go ahead and change this one to a 0, and I have my 2. I would go ahead. Now I have 11. I have 11 ones. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead, right, and I no longer have my 10. So 11 minus 8, I can definitely do that. So 11 minus 8 is going to give me 3. So my answer would be 3 and 4/10. Okay? Let's go ahead and work on number 3 now. So for number 3, I have 27 and 8/10 minus 13 and 76/100, right? And so I can already tell, right, that I'm going to have to use placeholder zeros just like I did in number 2. So I'm going to go ahead and set up my problem first. So I have my top number with a decimal, bottom number with a decimal. I'm going to have to subtract. And then I have my answer, in this case, the difference with a decimal. So let's start with the first one. So I have 2 digits to the left of the decimal. So that's 27. And I have 8, 1 digit. So I'm going to go ahead and put that. I'm going to put my next number, which is 13. That's 2 to the left of the decimal. Okay, 13 and 76. And now I can see what I'm talking about with that placeholder 0, right? I see that I have an empty spot here, so I'm going to have to put my 0 there. Okay, so now I can go ahead and I can get started with my subtraction. So let's go ahead, and I'm sorry, I'm just fixing that real quick. Okay, so now I have 0 minus 6. Well, if I have nothing, I know that I cannot take 6 from it, right? Because having 0 means I have nothing. So I'm going to have to regroup, and I'm going to have to take from those 8/10. I'm going to have to take 1/10 and break it apart into hundredths. So now instead of 8/10, I'm going to have 7/10, and instead of 0 hundredths, I'm going to have 10 hundredths. And now I can take away the 6 from the 10. So 10 minus 6 is going to give me 4. Okay, and then I have 7 minus 7, which would give me 0. Then I go to 7 minus 3, and that gives me 4. And then 2 minus 1 gives me 1. So my response for number 3 would be 14 and 4/100. Okay, last one we have is number 4. Number 4 is unique because if you pay attention, I have 15 minus 5 and 32/100, right? And so when I have problems like this, where I have a whole number and then I have one with decimals, I like to think of it like money, right? So it's like if I had $15 and I went to the store and I bought something and it cost me $5.32, how much would I have left over? And when I think of it as money, I know that for $15 in money, right, I know that I write that, I can write that like this, right? And now I can see that, hey, I have my decimal. So now I can set that up for in my problem. So again, I'm going to set up my decimals. I'm subtracting. And I'm going to bring my other decimal down. So I'm going to go ahead and again, how many do I have to the left of the decimal in this first number? I have 2 digits, right? So it's 15. My next one I have is 5 and 32. So I have 1 to the left of the decimal, and then I have 2 to the right. And we can see here that we would have our 2 spots for our placeholder zeros, right? I have 1, 2. Anything where I have any empty spots, that's where I would fill it in. And if you pay attention right here, next to the 5, I also have a spot there. Now my digits are even. Right now my numbers are even, and now I can go ahead and subtract. So again, this one is unique because, right, I have 0 and I need to take away 2. Well, I cannot take 2 from 0, so I'm going to have to regroup. However, when I look at my number in the 10th place, I have a 0 there as well. I do not have enough to borrow, right, to regroup. So I'm going to have to go to my ones place, right, my wholes. So here, my first one here that I have is a 5. So I'm going to go ahead and take one of those wholes, and remember, I'm going to break it apart, just like we did here, right? And if you remember, a whole, we already discussed this, is now known as a flat. So I'm taking it apart, and I know that there are 10 tenths. Okay, I know there are 10 out of 10 make one whole, 10 tenths. So I no longer have a whole. I'm going to go ahead and have, right, I have 4. I'm going to take these 10 tenths, and I'm going to break it apart so that they actually become tenths. It's no longer, they're not no longer packed together. So I have 10 tenths. So now I'm going to go ahead and put my 10 over here. Now, if I look though, my hundredths place, right? My hundredths place, which is, my hundredths place, which is right here, it still does not have enough. I still cannot take 2 from 0. But now I have enough to regroup from my tenths place. So now I can take one of these tenths, one of these 10 tenths, and break it apart even further and get my 10 hundredths, right? Because I know that 10 hundredths make up 1/10. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up. So now I have 9 tenths, and I'm taking that 1/10 and bringing it over here, and now I have 10 hundredths, okay? Now, if we look closely, now I have enough to take. So 10 minus 2 is going to give me 8. Okay? And now if I look, 9 minus 3 is going to give me 6. Okay? If we look at the next one, 4 minus 5. Well, hold on. 4 minus 5. If I have 4, I cannot take 5 from it. So again, we're going to have to regroup, right? I'm going to have to borrow from my tens place. So I'm going to go ahead and just erase this from up here so that we have enough space to work everything out. And so I'm going to take this 1/10 that I have, sorry, not a tenth, this 1/10 that I have, I'm going to break it apart into 10 ones. 10, right, ones plus this 4 is going to give me now 14. Now I have enough to take away the 5. So 14 ones minus 5 ones, right, is going to give me 9. And then for 0 minus 0, well, that would be 0. So my response is going to be 9 and 68 hundredths. Okay, and so please make sure that you've gone through this with me, because you are going to go ahead and have additional independent practice that's going to be in word problems, and I do need us to understand how we are supposed to go about subtracting. And if you have any questions, remember, just feel free to ask.